You're listening to the Deep Purple Podcast, a fan podcast about one of the most legendary bands of all time, Deep Purple. We take a look at the music, history, and people behind the band Deep Purple and beyond. Welcome to the Deep Purple Podcast, bonus episode number 9, Mo Foster. This week, we are lucky enough to be joined by the legendary bass player, Mo Foster. John, what are we going to be discussing with Mo today?
So today, Mo talks about the Butterfly Ball, his new CD, and his career in between, and a lot of great and funny stories, too, that really don't have anything to do with music.
I know, that's our favorite kind. So
some that do.
So yeah, we had a blast talking with Mo. Hopefully you enjoy listening to it. And here we go. Here's our interview with Mo Foster. All right. Today we are joined by Mo Foster, who needs no introduction on our show. Mo, thank you so much for joining us.
Great pleasure.
So, wanted to start off, you've got this great new album coming out. Can you tell us a little bit about where that came from and why that's coming out now?
How long have you got?
All day for you.
It is a long story. I'll just show it to you. This is the... there's the cover.
Great.
And that was designed by a friend of mine who I'd showed her the cover to Dave Brubeck's Time Out album.
Oh, great.
She just sort of vaguely inspired by that, and that's where it came from. I'll try and cut this down. I had in the 70s, I had a band called Affinity. We were a kind of jazz rock band, and we were managed by Ronnie Scott at the club. And that lasted its course. The singer was Linda Hoyle, and many, many years later, I re-met her at a reunion gig at my university, and she came and joined us on stage and sang, and it was good fun, and we started writing. And the outcome of that was an album for her, this is 5 years ago, called The Fetch, which I had to mix and finish in Canada, which is where she lives, London, Ontario. And I'd set up a launch gig for her at a jazz club in London called the Pizza in Dean Street. And I got the greatest players to support her for this launch gig. And 2 weeks before the show, I got a call from Canada, a very croaky voice saying she's so ill, poor girl, she couldn't make the flight. So I was suddenly stuck with the finest musicians in town and a ready gig and nothing to do for it because I couldn't play the songs. So I frantically rewrote everything and came up with all my favorite standards and new ones, just enough to get through the set. I recorded it, and I was amazed that it worked. Everybody rose to the occasion. And after it took lots of months, years in fact, to get everyone together more, write more, do more gigs, which I recorded. And all the way trying to find some method of releasing this because everyone says the CD is dead, but I don't think it is. And finally, after so many rejections, I felt like J.K. Rowling, in the Indus turned out. I found a company called Right Track Music who liked the idea. And here we are, it's coming out in March. So it's a sort of 10-year story that led up to it.
Oh, so was this recording from 10 years ago, or?
Well, it's at various points throughout the last 5 years, different weeks. I just chose the best tune. It took a long time to listen to everything and fine-tune it. all in this little room, you see. This is my studio.
It's great. I mean, we were we got that advanced copy of it and checked it out, and we were listening to it even before you got on. And the thing that amazes me about it, as well as obviously the playing, but the production of it is so good. We're listening, and then you forget that then all of a sudden this crowd comes and starts clapping, and you it's after every tune I keep getting surprised, like, oh yes, it's a live album.
What can I say? it just took a very long time to get it to sound like that. Lots of fine tuning. I took advice from some great engineers, people like Ken Scott, who did lots of Beatles stuff at Abbey Road. And because they have different ears to musicians, they think differently. And so I was able to pick up some pretty good tips on how to spread things out, make them clearer, what to get rid of, all that kind of stuff.
Well, it definitely paid off because it sounds great, and you've got a really good collection of some really good classic tunes as well as some originals as well.
Sure.
So what kind of what made you come to this collection of songs? Was it just kind of over time you decided these are some of the ones you guys enjoy playing the most?
Some I've wanted to play for 50 years. Some I found on the way. We tried a lot of tunes we tried that just didn't work. I was trying to. Well, what happened was I toured with Gil Evans. Do you know Gil Evans, the composer arranger?
I know the name. Yep.
He worked with Miles Davis. He produced some albums like Sketches of Spain in the 60s. And I toured with his British band. And it was a treat to hear how this man worked and get his views on everything. And what I was trying to do for some of these tunes was hit the Gil Evans orchestra in miniature to kind of condense 12 people down to about 5, which is hard because you have to keep swapping roles or figure out who does the unisons. And it was a challenge all the way, kept changing. In fact, the fiddle player, Chris Haig, which you've probably heard, only came in the last couple of months. I had to overdub him because he wasn't at the gigs.
Oh, I was going to ask about that because I noticed he wasn't on the list of musicians. So I said, that sounds an awful lot like a fiddle.
That's right, yes, yeah. He's I've known him for a long time. He's a terrific fiddle player, bluegrass and everything like that. And I loved the sound he makes. And I slowly realized that he could do unisons with soprano sax, and it worked. It was a beautiful texture. But it took a bit of experimenting, and there you go. That's what it was.
So we, I think long before we even knew your name, we both became familiar with you through your work on a couple of albums in particular, one of them being The Butterfly Ball. And
Sure.
Personally, I'm a bass player, so I definitely connect with bass when I hear it. And when I really like it, that can definitely tilt an album in my favor. And around that time, I think that probably the 3 albums that I was most interested in were Jesus Christ Superstar, The Butterfly Ball, and The Wizards Convention. And you represent 2/3 of the bass playing on that. And
So it's mine.
before I knew who you were or Alan Spenner were, I was always just, because I probably had like a dubbed copy of a cassette or something, and no liner notes, no way of getting the actual album in the US. The last 2 albums. I'm sorry?
No American players in your list?
No, well, not at that time anyway. But these albums, Jesus Christ Superstar was easy to come by, but the last 2 was basically impossible. My friend John here was able to get a copy of The Butterfly Ball, and we didn't know anything about it. We're like, what is this album? We just knew it was vaguely related to Deep Purple. It was why we got into it.
Sure.
And then I start to learn, like, oh, Mo Foster. This is why I really dig this album. So, and I think
I was always amazed while we were doing it. I kept thinking, I even said it to Roger. Why have you got me in? Why aren't you doing this?
Yeah. Well, I think I probably assumed, we probably both assumed that it was Roger Glover playing. Although when you listen to it, I mean, doesn't sound like Roger Glover at all.
He's on one track with John Gustafson on that track.
Oh, okay. Oh, he must play on it.
Behind the veil or something. I can't remember.
Like I think the thing that they have in common with Jesus Christ Superstar too is you've got not just a bunch of musicians who don't know each other, but you've got these kind of core bands that are supporting the album. So as far as The Butterfly Ball goes, what do you remember from that album recording? You've got kind of a few phases. You've got the album, you've got the concert, and then you've got the movie. So what's your kind of memory of that time?
Well, the album was a treat to record. We were doing it at a studio called Kingsway, which is where a lot of famous records are made. Jimi Hendrix did Hey Joe there, for example. And that's where I met Roger. And the players, Ray Fennick was on guitar, and Eddie Hardin was around, different drummers. But it was so musical. I was so impressed by Roger's musicality, by the way it was so completely not a Deep Purple record, and lovely. And then eventually, well, it was intended to be the music for an animation. You've probably seen Love Is All.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that, I think the money ran out or something like that. But in order to keep it going, the idea was to put on this concert at the Albert Hall with lots of Purple guests and film it, and it would be for a charity. And the concert was fantastic. Everybody rose to the occasion. And sometimes performing the song on stage for the first time, you never heard it before. And it went down very well. And then we went to see the film. I mean, I've told you this. It was a showing in a cinema in Chelsea. And we watched in horror as these fucking bad actors in bad rabbit outfits suddenly leapt onto screen, ballet dancers, and it was appalling. And Roger very noticeably stood up and left the building. It was disgusting. We're hoping that the bits that were cut out are somewhere and could be brought back in again. Because have you seen the concert bits on YouTube at all?
Yeah, I've seen the movie. We've both watched the movie. We did a 4-part episode series on the whole album, and the final part was watching the movie. And when
you see Glenn Hughes singing or David Coverdale, it's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then on come the rabbits.
It's one of the more baffling things I've ever seen in my life, and frustrating, I should say, because like you said, I would pay a large sum of money to see the uncut concert footage, because you've got this juxtaposition of some of the worst amateur cinematography ever with one of the greatest concerts. Like we've had the question from our viewers before, if you could go back in time, what would you do? And as I would go to the Butterfly Ball concert at the Royal Albert Hall and be there in person. And we've talked to a few of our listeners who were there and talk about how incredible it was, and very strange to define it that way.
I think the one very funny outcome was that you saw Vincent Price sitting high up in the organ loft of the album. Very impressive, very dominant. And when the show was over, everybody forgot about him and he got locked in. Vincent Price is locked in the Albert Hall.
Did he have to spend the night, or did he get out in time?
I think he was found.
That's great. Brings us to the other album that we discussed, which is the Wizards Convention, and we had gotten, when it first got released on CD, this kind of the Butterfly Ball with a few tracks from the Wizards Convention. So of course there was really no internet to do research at the time, and we're like, what is this? There's a few extra tracks here that we really like too. How do we get this album now? It wasn't something you'd find even in secondhand shops around here. So how did that project come about?
Well, it's Eddie Hardin's project. I think he just wanted to carry on. He liked what had happened with Butterfly Ball. I think, didn't he co-wrote Love Is All, I think. Mm-hmm. So he wanted to carry on. So he just got some of the same guys, same studio, and a few of his other mates. And that's it, really.
And it does kind of lend itself to being almost a sort of sequel to that album, and
yeah, sure.
Carries on that feeling.
There was another one as well. Number 2, Wizards 2. Have you seen that one?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, that was in the mid '90s, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So what was you had some other projects with Eddie Hardin too? What was your relationship like with him musically?
I have one memory of Eddie. It would be a Sunday morning. I'm having breakfast. The phone rings. It's Eddie. He says, can you come down the studio? I said, what time? He said, 2 hours ago. It was spontaneous, that's all. It was really just a working relationship. I just turned up in the studios and that was it.
So he'd kind of just give you some, like a structure of the song that was written, some charts, and you'd just do your thing?
Yes. There's no instruction. Chord chart if I was lucky. Mm-hmm. Mostly people like him and Jerry Rafferty, I work with a lot. You sit next to them while they play the piano and write your own chart, write inversions and shapes, little riffs, whatever. It's up to you. And that's what you're hired for, to do that.
When you hear kind of like the bass line like you have on like a song like Money to Burn, as a young bass player, you hear that and your ears perk up, and that's what you want to play like, hearing.
I got annoyed by that. There was a riff in the middle of that which I wrote and never got paid for it.
Oh,
Bit late now.
I'm sure that's got to be that whole process of accrediting everything's got to be very difficult.
It's hard. I mean, the famous ones are things like Anthony Jackson, who wrote the intro to Money Money. Do you know the song, the OJs?
Yep.
It's a brilliant bass intro, and the song is nothing without that, is it? And he had a long fight. He did get something for it in the end, which is good.
You can see why some bands have such hard feelings and have these messy breakups and everything when that part of it can get very challenging.
Yeah, the smart ones are like, I think is it U2? Or they just split everything 4 ways. That's simple. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like the easiest way, but then sometimes resentments can creep up depending on who's in the band. Say, well, I wrote 39% of the song, really.
It reminds me of at the end of a long meal, and one guy says, but I didn't have a prawn cocktail.
Yeah. Exactly. But yeah, like there's something about that that time period, and we've covered a lot of albums from that time period, and you start seeing the same names come up all the time, the same great musicians. We've had Ray Fenwick on the show as well, and heard some of his stories, which was excellent. And when you start,
sorry, I'm interrupting. Sorry,
no, please.
In the States, you have the Wrecking Crew, as it became known, which is the LA session team. You know that. Well, we had a similar team or set of teams here, but it never had a name. Can you see that little poster behind me there? We're making a documentary on it.
One more time, it says?
Yeah.
Yep.
It's been at it 7 years so far. Always the hard bit is raising money for it. But there were little pockets. There was me and Ray Fenwick and Henry Spinetti maybe doing lots of stuff for Eddie. And then I had other teams with other drummers and things. And it was very friendly. But we swapped and mixed and matched. It was great.
Yeah, and it's like I said, these names, and some of them I've looked into it. Some of them have sort of faded into obscurity, and we recognize them when we see these, like Liza Strike and Helen Chappell, when they start popping up on every other album as being the backup singers. We definitely have taken notice. So you went into this band Fancy with Ray Fenwick and Les Banks. Did that spring about from this time, from the Butterfly Ball, or was that happening before that?
Before, yeah. Mike Hurst, the producer, who was in a band called the Springfields, do you remember them at all? He's become a producer, and he had this idea. He wanted to do a sexy version of Wild Thing, Girl. And he found this girl called Helen Caunt, amazing name, who was a Penthouse pet. She looked great, but couldn't sing, and she was perfect for the role. All she had to do was breathe. And he got me and Ray in to help with the track. And somehow we found Liz. I can't remember. No, sorry. It was Henry Spinetti on the track. And the song was okay. It was a pop song, but suddenly it took off in the States, into the charts. So we did a follow-up one, so it got in the charts as well. And this seemed to be too good to be wasted. So we put a band together. Found Les Binks and found a singer called Andy Kavanagh, who was in the show Superstar at the time. And we rehearsed, wrote some new stuff, recorded, and toured the States. And the trouble was, we were better than Wild Thing. So we became a good, funky band, which the audience didn't want. They wanted a pile of shit that sounded like the record. So it was confusing. And it was good fun at the time. So me, Ray, and Les became the center of the band for Butterfly Ball.
And yeah, and definitely create the feeling for that album, and it was really exciting because like growing up when we did, like I said, in the cassette era, we missed out on a lot of this stuff at the time. So coming across any fancy albums was not going to happen in the early 90s. We've all been going through our back catalogs, and there are labels that specialize in this now. And fancy, as from this minute, we're bringing out a 3 CD set, which is the 2 main albums, plus some live stuff I found of the band playing, and an interview in Memphis and all places. So if you want to hear the band, it's coming out now, the new set. All right, John, we'll have to cover that on the show. I'll be the first in line to get that one. So obviously you're, apart from all of these great live performances and everything, your studio resume is mind-blowing. And when I'm talking to my wife, who basically doesn't know, she knows what she knows from hearing me blather on about it, and part of doing the show is to save her from having to listen to me. John can listen to me instead.
You're still together.
So whenever so I'm talking to this person today, she said, "Who is that?" And then I say, "Here's some of the tracks they've played on." She's like, "Oh," and the average person in the street might not know Mo Foster's name, but when I start to tell about your resume, little do they know they've been listening to you their entire life. So, what are some of your highlights of this amazing studio career you've had?
Oh, it's hard. Did I send you that list? I did. Did you get that?
I don't know. I mean, I'm familiar with a lot of the projects.
I'll send it to you. Somebody asked me to write out a list of everything I've played on.
Oh.
And I freaked myself out. But it took a few weeks. I was finding things in cupboards and looking at Discogs to help. And it's almost 300 albums.
Wow.
Over 50 years. Yeah, it's a big piece of work. And there's a lot of shit there really was. we used to have a phrase at the time, if a piece of music was that bad, the phrase was lie back and think of the invoice. But there were the pinnacles, there were the great ones. Working with Jeff Beck was such a treat. He's the finest guitar player in the world, I think. He just improves every day. And when I toured with him, would you have been around then? We toured America in 1980.
Would have been a little before. Well, we were around, but we weren't going to concerts.
Yeah, that's okay. That was wonderful. And I toured with Phil Collins, Gillan, I mentioned. Jerry Rafferty is a master songwriter, singer, and I did bits of 6 albums with him. That was wonderful. And just when you stand next to him, his mouth opens like a little slit, and out comes this golden sound. It was fantastic. I'm answering your question.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of connections between you and the extended Deep Purple family, and we've got in the early '80s, the Michael Schenker group, you were with Don Airey and Roger Glover and Simon Phillips, and
that's right. Yes.
How was that project?
That was amazing. I'd never met Michael before. Simon I knew from Jeff, and we got together in studio in North London. I forgot the name of it now. No, sorry, it's gone. And Don wasn't there, actually. Don must have been adding stuff.
Oh, okay.
It was just Roger producing and the 3 of us. It was loud. we did a rehearsal in a little rehearsal room in Shepherd's Bush in London. And I'm in a small room with Michael Schenker and a double Marshall stack. That, your cheeks are going in. And I used to smoke in those days. I had some Marlboro, and I used 2 Marlboro filter in my ears. I looked like a twat, but it saved my life. Don't ever take photographs. That was amazing. But it struck me later, very funny, when you hear some of those tracks, the energy is fantastic, isn't it? Pounding away. And if you could take a photograph of the session, you'd see me sitting there quietly on a chair, staring at the page like this. But out comes the sound. It's so different. It's not what you expect.
Right. It's and yeah, how was working with Roger Glover as a producer?
I love him. He just has great ideas. He's very sympathetic, friendly. It just works. And he solves problems as well. But in this, the studio was called Wessex. It's a big room, and for some reason it was very dead. And Simon's big kit needs to breathe, and it wasn't doing it in the room. So Roger had this brilliant idea of hiring in a PA system, so all the kit was mic'd up into this big split system, which then blasted out into the room, and then he mic'd up that. So the sound of the kit is an amplified kit in a studio.
Oh wow,
That's clever.
it's really. Now I have to listen to that album again with a with a different ear. So I mean,
you mentioned the Purple. I worked with Ian Paice. I did some tracks for Gary Moore, and
I think you said that was one of your favorite projects, right? Was working with Ian Paice and Gary Moore.
it was lovely. Yeah, we did a track called Empty Rooms. It was the first one, and it's just beautiful. It's a lovely track.
What was it like working with Gary Moore?
I loved him because he was such a free player. He gave such energy. In fact, when I did my first album in '87, it was called Bella Cis, first solo album. I'd asked Jeff to play on it, and to my great surprise, he said yes. So I was going to have Jeff Beck on an album. And then a week before the recording, he was working on one of his hot rods, and a plank slipped and trapped his thumb and broke it in 2 places. So no way can he play. And in panic, I rang up Gary. So if you can't get Jeff Beck, get Gary Moore. And,
not a bad replacement.
Not a bad choice, yeah. And he played beautifully. I had to record him in. He was on what's called a tax year out of the country. He was in Ireland. He was in Dublin. There's a studio there called Windmill Lane. And I flew over one Sunday morning with my 2-inch 24-track tape. Flew to Dublin, set it up, and he played exquisitely. And we did 3 tracks, packed up the tape, had a pint of Guinness, and flew home. And I was terrified on the flight home because I got this unrepeatable performance of Gary on the tape, not copied. There's no, we didn't copy anything in those days. And a guy came and sat next to me on the plane and put his briefcase next to my tape. And my surreal imagination took over. I thought he might be a magnet salesman. For samples. I got it home and it was all right. It was great. It played beautifully. Some years later, 10 years ago, we did a charity gig in a big field in Sussex, about 3,000 people. And it was my band with Ray Russell and Gary Husband. And Gary was a guest. And I couldn't resist this. I brought him on stage, said to the audience, would you please welcome a dear friend of ours and one of the finest guitar players in his price bracket. he loved it.
So apart from your work on your amazing work in your resume here, your list of albums you performed on, you've got this great book that came out a few years ago, the British Rock Guitar. Which,
you like it?
Oh, it's great. We've talked about it a number of times on the show. Just I mean, I can only imagine the amount of work that you put into a book like this. It's not just like you sat down and typed out some stories. I mean, the pictures and the way it's a great book because you could sit down and read it from front to back, or you could pick it up at any page and just start reading and get a great little story. You could be a coffee table book. It could work in any format. So how did this project come along, and how long did it take you to write this?
Well, it took a lifetime. I'll just tell you, a friend of mine said he keeps his copy in his toilet. Gave him a problem. He calls it Foster's ring. I love stories. I'm sure you do. And I just happened to gather them. People would often say, we chatting around the table, people would often say, we must write this down. And no one ever did. But very slowly I began to get things together and realized there was something here. It took a long time to structure it. I couldn't figure out how to put, what was interesting, what wasn't. And I'm carrying on. I've still been collecting stories. I'll just tell you a quick one I love. I've mentioned Ray Russell, my guitar playing friend, who's on this album. Jump back to 1967. He's on tour with Cat Stevens. Do you remember Cat Stevens? Mm-hmm. Had a hit at the time called I Love My Dog. And they're touring Sweden. And the support band is the Jimi Hendrix Experience.
Not a bad support band.
Because they haven't happened yet, you see. And of course, so Ray and he got on because they're both playing Fender Stratocasters. And one night, Ray had gone to bed, and he's on the ground floor in this hotel. He hears a tap at the window. He opens the curtains. There's Jimi Hendrix standing there in his full outfit, saying, "Hey man, I got locked out in the hotel. Can you let me in?" So Ray's in his pajamas or something, and he opens the window. Jimi Hendrix climbs in, and they both sit on this single bed. And Ray said, "Would you like a cup of tea?" That's it. Not the question you think you'd ask Jimi Hendrix, is it?
Yeah, if you could go back and ask Jimi Hendrix any question, what would it be? Would you like a cup of tea?
So what am I saying? It took a hell of a lot of research. It was all pre-Google. There was everything was face-to-face. I had to travel to places to meet people and subterfuge, trying to draw photographs out of bottom drawers. It was a very different world then. But I loved it because the people are so entertaining and the stories are fantastic.
And I'd imagine it's just remembering a lot of stories, like walking down the street and saying, "Oh, I've got to put this in the book." It just popped in my head, and scribbling down notes. I've got to make sure I type this one up.
Absolutely. I've got folders of bits of paper, exactly that, yeah. One thing that was both good and bad was towards the end of the editing, and I've got a deadline approaching. It was driving me crazy because I could hear people talking. It's like a cacophony in my head of stories and shouting. And the only cure, bizarrely, was whiskey. And I was getting through a lot of it, too much. And the day the book finished, I thought, sod this. And I stopped. And I haven't drunk since. So it was very easy to stop, but it was a terrible time, those 2 months.
Oh yeah, just trying to wrap up this. I can imagine as tying all of this together had to have been quite a challenge.
Just a bit, yeah.
And this is great. I had this out from my father-in-law lived in England for about a decade, and in the 70s. So, and he's really into this kind of music. So I had this out when I first got it, and he came over for dinner that night, back when he could come over for dinner. And he was just fascinated looking through this book and reading these stories, and said, "Oh, I know this guy. I know that guitar player." And
did he buy a copy?
No, I should buy him a copy. He just used my copy. I'll have to buy him a copy next Christmas. But some of the funniest stories in the book are these older stories of when the electric guitar was new on the scene and people didn't really know how to use it properly.
Sure. Well, I mean, in England, there were two contributing factors to that. We had what was called a post-war trade embargo with the States. which didn't finish till 1960.
Mm-hmm.
That meant we could get nothing American, which meant Fenders and Gibsons.
Mm-hmm.
So English rock and roll started out with players using piles of plywood from Czechoslovakia and Germany. It sounded like plywood. It just wasn't the same. And Hank Marvin got the first Strat, which is on the cover of that book. There's a story there I've got to tell you. Do you know the name Hank Marvin of the band The Shadows? Does it mean something to you?
Yes.
Yeah. They had a tune called Apache, which launched everybody. It was good. And he had a red Strat, which is, try to imagine 1960. It looked like a spaceship. And I wanted to get a photograph of it for the cover. And it was owned presently by Bruce Welch, who's one of the band. And he said, yeah, come round. He has a house in Richmond near the river. I went round with a photographer friend, Christina Jansen, and we photographed his Strat. And I had to carry it up from his music room to a higher room for light. And then he had to go off, so we're alone in his house. And so I carry his Strat down to his music room and I hear a terrible crash upstairs. I'm wondering what's happened. I go up and poor Tina had an aluminium stepladder, which he dropped on his white piano. And there was a big V in the wood, you know. And I was mortified. How do you tell this guy you've just fucked his piano? And it took a long time, a lot of placating, and I resolved it by hiring in some experts on that kind of repair, you know, so fixed his piano. And a few months later, I had a book launch at a place called Dingwalls in London. And there were several luminaries in the audience. Bruce was there, Bruce Welch, and Bill Wyman was there. And I'm starting to tell that story about this, and I hear a heckle coming out of the audience. It says, "What about my fucking piano?" Great. You need that, don't you?
What's amazing to me is the stories of that people were didn't know how the guitar worked and were trying to plug it into the wall.
Yeah, it was a common misconception. Nobody knew you needed an amplifier. Mike Rutherford of Genesis went with his mum to buy a guitar. I think he was 12. And they bought one. And the guy in the shop said, "Don't you need an amplifier?" And Mike said, No. He had no idea what he was talking about. You don't need an amplifier. The famous one is Francis Rossi of Status Quo, who opened his case, saw a cable in there with a jack plug in gen. Thought that's no good, so he cut off one plug and fitted a mains plug to plug the guitar in the mains. And he thought it needed time to warm up.
I love the idea of where they thought the sound was going to come out of.
Yeah, they had no idea. Nobody knew. It was so new, so brand new. And my friends at school, we hadn't got any money, so we made things. We made our own amplifiers, circuits in magazines, and my first bass was made from an acoustic guitar with the strings tuned down. The pickup was 2 military earphones inside a plastic soap dish, and it was okay up to the 5th fret. From then onwards. But it was exciting, you know, you made things. And still think, one of the guys in my band enjoyed making amplifiers, but he wasn't very good with materials. He didn't use strong supports and steel and stuff. He used lollipop sticks and sellotape. And cinema in this big town, which is hard to play because of the pitching of the steel. And his amplifier is here, and it kept cutting out because of the way he built it. And it every time it cut out, he'd turn around to do that to the amplifier, and the steel would be moving up the string a bit as he turned. So his performance was a sequence of kind of yodels. Can't go this. We were innocent.
Well, it's pretty great that you can have that.
People. Sorry.
Oh, I was just thinking it's great that you had this kind of intimate relationship with your instruments and were able to interact with them that way. Because I think a lot of people nowadays, and even from our generation, you bought a guitar and that was just the guitar. It was ready to go. You didn't really know how to fiddle with it too much, and you didn't really need to either. But you have a more intimate understanding of the instrument than our generation probably does.
Well, before you, people like Les Paul did that. They experimented. Started so much that he was brilliant.
So I wonder how does it look to you over the course of your career being a musician, seeing what a sort of like virtuoso guitar player in the 1950s and 60s would be like versus the things you see today that even in the course of my being a fan of music, I think I would have been astonished at how the progression I've seen musicians make. Like, what does that look like to you? What would you imagined of this future that we're living in now looking like?
I think the biggest journey are the Fender guitars. If Leo Fender could have begun to imagine what people did with the Stratocaster, we started out as a country instrument, didn't it? Really. And then a few rockers took it. And Buddy Holly was significant in playing it in a rock way. And then it slowly took off. And then people put their personalities on it, like Jimi Hendrix, Jeff Beck, Hank Marvin. It's all the same instrument, but my God, does it sound different. It's fantastic what they achieved.
Yeah, and then there hasn't been any, other than some kind of weird showy things, and there hasn't been a ton of technological advance in the electric guitar in the last 50 years, right?
Well, yeah, little ones. I mean, it doesn't hum so much. It's more stable, but not that moment in 1954. I think the Strat was world beating. It was a stunning moment when that guitar came out. It was an object of. Do you remember the album cover, The Chirping Crickets, Buddy Holly, the Crickets?
Oh, yeah.
And there's a Strat there. We used to look at that and wonder what it was. It looked like a mixture of a kind of suite and a spaceship.
I like that idea. It's saying it looked like a spaceship. It was so futuristic looking, right?
Yeah, it's brilliant. And the weird part for me was discovering that Leo couldn't play. He just took it from guys who could and made it happen.
And they would have been still primarily using like upright basses at that time, right? It wouldn't have been that common to see an electric bass.
Yes, that's right. There was a bit of animosity two ways. One, the electric bass called the upright a doghouse. And the other way around, they called it a vulgar plank. But they're both wonderful. I'm better at electric than upright. I love the sound of an upright. It's so emotional. In fact, when the fretless came in, that was a kind of weird compromise. It was lovely. Do you know how I got my fretless? Do you know about this?
No.
I'd heard Jacko's album in '76, loved the sound, but didn't know how he did it. What I didn't know was that he just pulled the frets out and put wood filler in. Simple as that.
Right.
I didn't know. And I went to a symphony double bass repairer, guy who does the London Symphony Orchestra. And he had an old ebony neck off an old upright, took off all the frets of my jazz bass, fitted this ebony, went through 3 plane blades. It was so hard. And I had a fretless. And
oh, sorry, you broke up for a minute there. Oh. Oh. Oh, I don't. Oh, Yeah, I don't know if you can hear us, but you're frozen again.
Nightmare because the pitch was so awful. And but that was, I mean, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you broke up a little bit during the fretless story.
Shall I finish it?
Sure.
It's just that I had an all black neck, all ebony, and I had to go. I put some marks on so I could see where my fingers were. But that was it. I did it entirely the wrong way, but it sounded great. And it had down the bottom, it had a growl like Ron Carter. It was upright.
So it was actually a neck from an upright bass that you affixed to an electric body?
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So this was a Fender Jazz.
Oh, wow.
You can see it has a bit of an overhang.
Oh, yeah.
And the marks were put on afterwards. And I lost my Fender deck on 30 seconds. But that's it. It's lovely. I love the sound it makes. Beautiful.
Wow, that's something that I just wouldn't even know was possible.
Yes. I'm going to show you one other bass. Do you know the Olympic? You know the Olympic basses?
Yeah.
Made in California. Well, I needed to, in sessions, you have to have all kinds of different sounds available. So whatever anybody wants, you've got to be able to have it. You could not get Olympics in England. They weren't imported. And I happened to do an album at Caribou Ranch. You remember in Colorado? Do you remember that at all?
I don't know if I know that.
No? Okay. It's one of Jim Garcia had a studio there. Beautiful. On a big ranch. And afterwards, instead of going home, I went across to the East Coast and met some friends. And I ended up in 48th Street, which I'm sure you know.
Mm-hmm.
And in Sam Ash, they had 3 Olympics hanging there. This is like treasure. Yeah. And I got this one, bought it. She's quite a beautiful piece of stuff.
Beautiful.
Yeah, love it. Yeah. And
careful.
I recorded with it and toured with Jeff Beck that came on the road with me. And then, what year? About 85. It was a hot day and my front door got left open a teeny bit. Someone just walked in, saw a tall case, and off with it. It disappeared. And 3 years later, that's 30-something years later, I get a call from a guy in Cambridge. And we chat, and it turns out he's got it. He bought it very cheap somewhere in some weird... It's gone around, and it had been very badly damaged.
Oh, wow.
And he was very kind. He got on the train, came to London, and gave it back to me.
Wow.
What a wonderful gesture that is, isn't it?
So how did he know it was yours?
There was his teacher had found my name inside a pocket somewhere in the case.
Oh, wow. Huh.
And I had to. It took 6 months to get it restored. It was such a state.
Oh God.
All the lack of curling, and it's just wonderful to have it back. But after 30-something years, it's very weird.
Yeah.
It doesn't appear on any of my own albums because I didn't have it.
Oh wow. Are you using that on your most recent recording?
No, because it was just one Fender on the live stuff.
Wow. Well, that's got to kind of feel relieving and kind of strange at the same time, right?
Odd, yeah. I couldn't play it at first. It's like when you meet a very old friend or something. You're cautious and you have to feel your way back into something. Just.
So you're like meeting an old friend from grade school that you haven't seen.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Mo, thank you so much for taking some time to speak with us this morning. This has been a real treat for us to be able to talk with you.
I hope it was interesting.
Oh, it's always interesting. And every when we were talking to one a couple years ago, I think, we had we talked with Martin Ford, had him on the show, and I mentioned something about you, and he said, "Oh, Mo will be much more interesting than me. He'll have some great stories."
Great.
And yeah, Martin was great.
Did he tell you his dog shit story with Phil Collins?
No, I don't think so.
Martin did some orchestral stuff on Phil's album.
Mm-hmm.
And he arrived at Phil's house one day. Phil just had a beautiful carpet fitted in his living room. And Martin comes in, says, "Great," and walks around the room, not realizing there was a big dog turd stuck in his shoe and it spread all over this new carpet.
It's a great first impression to make, right?
Exactly. Yes. In fact, if you look at Phil's first album, there's a credit to Martin Kicker's Floor. That's the reference.
Oh man, he didn't tell that story. Maybe that story is a little more painful for him.
Probably.
For you. Oh, that's great. Well, thank you again so much for coming on. So how are people going to find this new album? When's it coming out? How do they find you?
It's coming out in middle of March. That's 2 months. The label is Right Track Records. That's all I can tell you right now. I'm sure you'll find it from that. It's called Mo Foster and Friends in Concert. And it looks like this.
Oh, great. We'll be sure to post the links to all that when it comes out too. So,
I mean, you spoke to Sam, didn't you? Sam.
Yes.
She'll tell you everything.
Oh, great.
I can't believe it. At my age, I've got a PR person. Never had one before.
It's the first time?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
wow. Oh, she's great. So, well, Mo, thank you so much for coming on our show. We really appreciate talking to you.
Great. Yeah, you too.
All right. Have a great day.
Thank you. See you again. Okay.
Thank you for listening to the Deep Purple podcast. If you like what you hear and would like more episodes in the future, please donate on Patreon to support the show. You can also give us a rating on iTunes to help new people discover the show. You can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for show updates. See deeppurplepodcast.com for more details. Thank you for listening.
Do you realize this is like a seance?
Mo Foster has entered the room.